The stars stretched like frozen sparks around the salvage ship as it drifted into the debris field. Broken hulls of forgotten warships floated in silence, their twisted metal glowing faintly in the pale light of distant suns. The human pilot sat alone, watching his scanners, hunting for anything worth pulling from the graveyard of battles long past. He had done this for years, threading between shattered wrecks and husks of machines that once raged across the stars. But tonight, something felt different. His gut told him this was not just another salvage run. His scanner blinked. A huge shape drifted across the void, larger than anything he had ever found before. It was a warship, alien design, half torn apart, its surface scorched by plasma fire and scarred by missile impacts. Towers that once held weapons now leaned like broken bones. Energy still shimmered weakly across the hull as if the vessel refused to die completely. He leaned forward, his breath held. A wreck like this could make him rich for life. But then, in the silence of his cockpit, he thought he heard something, soft, almost like a whisper. He froze. Voices didn't belong out here. Static filled his headset, then a faint sound pushed through. It wasn't a sensor echo. It wasn't background noise. It was a cry. A voice, weak, trembling, not mechanical but alive. He turned off the thrusters, drifting silently as if afraid the wreck itself might hear him. Sweat ran down his temple. Ships didn't talk. Wrecks didn't whisper. The warship loomed larger as he approached. His lights cut through the broken corridors visible through gaping holes in the hull. Twisted metal groaned as if protesting his presence. He guided his craft closer, docking with what remained of an airlock. The seals hissed, and the doors fought to open against years of silence. Dust drifted like ghosts as he stepped inside, his boots echoing through the empty passage. The corridors smelled of burned metal and something sour, like old blood. Shadows stretched across the walls, broken only by the thin beam of his helmet light. The deeper he walked, the stronger the sense that he was not alone. Every scrape of his boots echoed like a warning. Then the voice returned, louder now, breaking through his headset. "Help us. Please." He stopped cold, his breath shaking. It was not one voice, but two, both female, both desperate. He raised his weapon, scanning the darkness. His light swept across twisted doors, collapsed bulkheads, and shattered control panels. Then he saw the chains. They glittered faintly in the beam of his light, anchored to the wall of a chamber at the end of the corridor. And in the dim glow, two figures sat huddled together. They were alien women, their skin pale under the dust, their eyes wide with fear. Strange collars circled their throats, wires running into the wall. Their wrists were bound in heavy chains, their clothes torn and ragged, more like costumes than real uniforms. When his light touched them, they flinched back, shielding their faces as if expecting pain. He lowered his weapon slowly, stunned. One of them whispered again, her voice hoarse. "Human? You can hear us?" He nodded, unable to speak. She let out a sob, and the other leaned forward, her eyes shining with desperate hope. "You're alive," she said softly. "We thought no one would ever come." He stepped closer, his heart pounding. The collars glowed faintly, pulsing with the last traces of power from the ship. The chains looked fused, not simple iron, but something designed to keep even strong creatures helpless. He reached out, but stopped short of touching them. "Who did this to you?" he asked. Their gazes dropped, full of shame. The first one answered in a trembling voice. "We were taken, sold, used." The word caught in her throat, her eyes wet with tears. "When the ship was attacked, everyone fled. They left us here to die." He clenched his jaw, scanning the chamber again. Scattered across the floor were broken cups, torn fabrics, and scraps of food rations. It was not a prison cell. It was a cage meant for display, for ownership. His stomach twisted. These were not prisoners of war. They were property. The second woman leaned forward, her hands shaking in the chains. "Please, human, we can't break free. You are the only one who has come. You are our only chance." The words sank deep into him. He glanced around, trying to find a control panel or a release system, but the walls were burned, the circuits melted. Whoever chained them here hadn't wanted them freed. His helmet light flickered, and for a second, the entire ship groaned as if alive, echoing with distant creaks. He stiffened, realizing the wreck still held power. That meant danger. He looked back at the women, their eyes locked onto his, full of fear and fragile trust. He should have turned and left. Salvage pilots didn't get involved. Salvage pilots survived by staying clear of other people's wars, other people's misery, but their chains rattled softly in the stale air, a sound that pressed against his chest like a weight. Another groan shuddered through the warship. The floor beneath him trembled. Systems somewhere deep inside flickered back to life, lights sparking in the corridor behind him. The wreck was not dead. Something stirred in its core, as though waking up. The women gasped, pressing back against the wall, their eyes filled with terror. He tightened his grip on his weapon and turned toward the shadows. The ship wasn't as empty as it first seemed. The dim light of his helmet flickered across the chamber as he crouched beside the chains. The two alien women pulled closer together, their eyes fixed on him with fear and hope mixing in equal measure. He reached out to test the metal links, and a shock snapped against his glove, making him hiss and pull back. The collars around their necks glowed brighter, responding to his touch as if warning him away. One of the women whimpered softly, her lips trembling. "It hurts us whenever someone tries." He steadied his breathing and scanned the room again. Broken panels lined the wall, wires hanging loose like veins of a dying beast. He followed one of the glowing cords from the collar into the wall and noticed a half-functioning console sparking faintly in the corner. He rose and stepped closer, brushing off dust and grime with his hand. Alien text scrolled across the cracked screen, but the meaning was lost to him. He tapped it, and the whole wreck groaned as though it resented his interference. Behind him, chains rattled. One woman whispered, "They left us here, not to die quickly, but slowly. Forgotten." Her voice cracked, and she lowered her head. The other reached across her lap, placing a hand on her shoulder, but her own eyes burned with fire. "If you cannot free us," she said sharply, "then kill us. Better than waiting for them to return." The human froze. Her demand pierced the silence. He turned toward them, his jaw tight. He had seen plenty of wrecks and corpses, but never survivors begging for death. He shook his head slowly. "I don't kill innocents." The fiery one's lips parted, and for a moment her defiance faltered. The quieter one's tears spilled, trailing down the curve of her alien skin. "Then save us," she whispered. "You are human. You are not like them." The words struck him hard. Not like them. He had always been told humans were scavengers, like rats of space, barely tolerated by the stronger alien races. Yet here in the broken belly of a warship, he was their savior. He gritted his teeth and turned back to the console. His fingers danced over the surface, guessing at symbols, trying to read patterns. A loud pop exploded from the panel, sparks flying, making him stumble back. The women cried out, their collars sparking painfully. He cursed under his breath and punched the metal side of the console in frustration. The entire wreck shivered with a metallic groan, and then, somewhere deeper inside, a low hum began to rise. The floor trembled beneath them. Emergency lights flickered on in the corridor, bathing the space in a bloody red glow. The women's eyes went wide, fear returning sharper than before. One of them hissed, "No, it wakes!" But her words broke into sobs. He aimed his weapon at the doorway, his instincts screaming. He hadn't triggered just the chains. He had stirred the ship itself. Faint mechanical clatters echoed from deep within, as though something metallic was crawling across the walls. The air grew heavier, filled with the scent of ozone and burning dust. The quieter woman shook her chains, desperate now. "Please, before it comes back!" Her voice cracked with terror. He grabbed at the links again, ignoring the sparks that stung his gloves, pulling with raw force. The chain refused to break. His muscles strained, veins bulging, his teeth clenched. For a moment, he thought it would snap, but then the collar flared and sent a burst of energy through the whole chain, throwing him back across the floor. He slammed into the wall with a grunt, gasping for air. The women cried out as the shock rippled through them, their bodies trembling. He pushed himself up, anger surging hotter than pain. Someone had designed this to be impossible, to keep them enslaved no matter what. From the corridor, a metallic howl rose, a sound that didn't belong to machines alone. It was mixed with something more primal, something alive. The women pressed against each other, shivering, their eyes locked on the door. The bolder one met his gaze, her voice low but steady. "Human, if you stay, you will die. If you run, you may live. But if you fight, you will not fight alone." Her words hung in the air as the shadows outside the doorway twisted. The wreck was no graveyard anymore. It was a cage awakening, and something was coming straight for them. The red lights pulsed like a heartbeat, casting long shadows across the ruined chamber. The human steadied his weapon, his chest heaving as the sounds grew louder. Metal claws dragging along the walls, gears grinding, pipes hissing under sudden pressure. The two chained women clung to each other, their trembling bodies pressed back against the wall as though trying to vanish into it. A chill swept through the corridor before anything appeared, and then a shadow shifted, moving with slow, deliberate steps. The first thing he saw was an eye. Not a natural one, but a glowing sphere of artificial light sweeping back and forth as if searching for prey. The creature emerged from the darkness, a twisted hybrid of machine and flesh welded together by desperate hands. Its limbs were reinforced with jagged steel, its spine bristling with cables, its face half covered in metal plating. It sniffed the air, releasing a guttural growl that rattled through the broken halls. The women gasped in horror, their collars flashing with pain, as though the monster's presence alone had power over them. He didn't wait. He raised his weapon and fired. The first shot cracked against its armor, sparking but barely slowing it down. The creature let out a shriek and lunged forward, its claws scraping across the floor, its voice a chorus of static and rage. He rolled aside as it swung at him, the strike smashing into the wall where he had stood. Debris showered down, filling the chamber with dust. He hit the ground hard but pushed up, firing again, aiming at its exposed joints. Sparks flew, and one of its legs buckled slightly. But the beast kept coming, relentless. The chained women screamed as the monster moved closer, its focus shifting toward them. The human's heart hammered. He knew it wanted them back, like possessions that had tried to slip from its grip. He darted forward, sliding between its legs, and slammed his boot against the base of its knee. The creature stumbled, roaring in fury. He used the moment to grab a length of broken pipe from the floor and jammed it into a nest of exposed wires along its spine. The monster convulsed violently, shrieking, its glowing eye flashing erratically. The chamber shook with the force of its thrashing. The women's chains rattled violently, sparks bursting from their collars as the ship's systems reacted. Their cries echoed in his ears, spurring him to move faster. He pulled free the pipe and smashed it again into the same spot. The creature staggered, falling to one knee, its roar vibrating through the deck. Then, just as he prepared to finish it, the ship itself seemed to awaken further. Lights flickered along the corridor, and more mechanical clattering rose in the distance. He froze, eyes narrowing. There was not just one of these things. There were more. The wounded creature dragged itself toward him, its claws leaving sparks as they scraped the metal floor. Its voice distorted into something almost like words, a broken transmission stitched with rage. Slaves. Mine. The women screamed again, the sound raw, desperate, full of terror. Their chains glowed like fire, reacting to the monster's claim. The human's grip on his weapon tightened. He fired a final shot directly into the glowing eye, and the head snapped back with a spray of sparks. The monster collapsed with a violent crash, its body twitching before going still. Silence lasted only a breath. From the depths of the corridor, more eyes blinked awake in the shadows. The sound of claws and gears filled the air once more, dozens this time, echoing like an army crawling closer. The human turned to the women, their terrified faces lit by the glow of their collars. He knew he couldn't fight them all. Not here. Not while they were still chained. But their eyes locked onto his, begging silently, trusting him despite the danger. He exhaled, steady and sharp as the shadows crept closer. The wrecked warship was alive with nightmares, and now the hunt had truly begun. The corridor thundered with approaching steps, each one heavier than the last. The human braced himself, sweat dripping down his face as he counted the glowing eyes drawing nearer. His weapon felt small, laughably small against the army rising from the shadows. He backed toward the chained women, their collars still glowing, their chains rattling with every tremor. Then, above the grinding and clattering, came a different sound. Boots. Voices. Laughter. Not machines this time. Something worse. From the far side of the hall, a group of armed figures stepped into the red glow. Their armor was patched with scraps, their weapons stolen and mismatched, but their faces carried the same cruel arrogance. Pirates. Scavengers who had returned to claim what was left of the wreck, and more importantly, the slaves they considered theirs. The leader, a tall alien with scarred skin and jagged teeth, smirked when he saw the human standing there. "A rat from Earth," he sneered. "And you think those two belong to you?" The women recoiled at the sight of him, their eyes wide with a deeper fear than they had shown for the machine creature. They pressed against the wall, silent but trembling. The human didn't lower his weapon. "They don't belong to anyone," he growled. His voice was low but steady, his finger firm on the trigger. The pirate laughed, a cruel sound that echoed off the metal walls. "Brave words for a scavenger. You know what we do with thieves?" He raised his hand, and the soldiers behind him cocked their weapons. The sound was deafening in the confined corridor. The human's mind raced. He couldn't win in a firefight, not here, not with the women chained. He needed to outthink them, not outgun them. He stepped back just enough to place himself between the women and the pirates. The leader grinned, showing teeth. "Step aside, human. These two are valuable. Alive or broken, they will fetch a high price. We don't need you." The women whispered together, one of them choking on her words. "If they take us again, we will not survive. Please, don't let them." Their eyes burned into his, pleading, demanding, trusting. The human felt the ship tremble again, the echo of more machines stirring in the dark. He realized the pirates hadn't come alone. They had woken the monsters too. For a heartbeat, he almost smiled. If he was clever, he could use that. The leader stepped forward, raising his rifle. "Last chance, human. Walk away." Instead, the human fired, not at the pirates, but at a weakened support beam above the corridor. The shot cracked through metal, and with a groan, part of the ceiling collapsed, crushing two pirates and blocking the passage. Dust and sparks filled the air. The survivors cursed, firing wildly through the debris, their shots striking walls and broken panels. The human ducked low, dragging a sparking cable from the floor and jamming it into a fuel canister by the wall. A burst of flame roared, forcing the pirates back in panic. In the chaos, the women cried out as their chains lit with pain again, the ship reacting to the violence. The human rushed to them, slamming his weapon's butt against the chain, desperate for any weakness. The leader shouted orders, fury in his voice. But then the ship itself shifted. A low growl rose from the depths, followed by the sound of claws scraping metal. The creatures had arrived, drawn by noise, by blood, by the collar's signal. The pirates turned too late. From the dark behind them, glowing eyes flared one after another. The creatures lunged, tearing into the soldiers with shrieks of metal and bone. Screams filled the corridor as the wreck became a slaughterhouse. The leader roared, firing wildly, but his men were dragged into the shadows one by one. The humans shielded the women, holding his weapon tight as the chaos raged, their terrified eyes locked on him. "We're not safe," one whispered. "They'll come for us next." He knew she was right. The wreck was no longer a battlefield. It was a feeding ground, and now, surrounded by both pirates and monsters, he had only one choice: fight through the nightmare or die chained beside them. The human's hands were raw from striking the chains, his weapon almost useless against the forged links that burned with alien energy. The two women gasped with every shock that rippled through their collars, their voices breaking as they begged him to hurry. The corridor beyond the chamber was chaos, screams, gunfire, the metallic screech of creatures tearing through armor. The pirates were no longer in control. They were prey, scattered and dying. He forced himself to think through the madness. The wreck was crumbling, its power surging wildly, its bones shaking with each blast. He spotted a panel above the chains, half buried in debris, sparking faintly. If there was any way to free them, it had to be there. He scrambled up, ripping away twisted metal with bleeding hands, and slammed his fist against the panel until it cracked open. Alien symbols glowed weakly across its surface. He couldn't read them, but he didn't need to. His fingers searched for patterns, switches, anything that felt like control. A sudden jolt surged through him when he touched one, throwing him back against the wall. The women cried out as their collars sparked violently. He dragged himself up, coughing, and slammed his hand against the same spot again, forcing the system to react. The chains quivered, one lock releasing with a hiss. The quieter woman gasped as her arm dropped free, her eyes filling with disbelief. "You did it," she whispered, but her relief was drowned by another thunderous roar from the corridor. One of the monsters had forced its way past the wreckage, its jagged body filling the passage. Blood dripped from its claws, glowing eyes locked directly on them. The human grabbed his weapon and fired, each shot sparking off the beast's armor. The free woman pulled against her remaining chains, trying to shield the other with her own body. The monster hissed, raising its claw, but the human leapt forward, smashing the butt of his rifle against its exposed joint. It staggered back, howling, before shoving through again with even greater fury. The floor lurched beneath them as the wreck tilted, alarms blaring in a language he couldn't understand. Somewhere outside, weapons fire hammered against the hull, shaking the ship apart. Another faction had arrived, joining the feeding frenzy over the dying warship. He had no time left. He threw himself at the panel again, ripping wires out with his bare hands. Sparks burst across his arms, burning him, but then another lock fell away. The second woman gasped as her legs dropped free. The monster lunged, claws striking where he had stood a second earlier, shattering the floor. He rolled aside, grabbing a shard of metal from the ground and driving it upward into the beast's throat. It shrieked, staggering, tearing the shard free in a spray of sparks and blood. He turned, grabbing the first woman and yanking at her chains, desperate to snap them loose. The corridor behind them was a storm of death. Pirates firing blind, monsters ripping them apart, the wreck itself trembling under the strain. Fire lit the walls, and smoke filled the air until every breath tasted like ash. He looked at the women, their terrified faces bathed in the red glow, and knew there was no time for patience. He raised his rifle and fired point blank at the final lock. The explosion of sparks nearly blinded him, and the women screamed as the energy surged. But then the chain snapped, clattering to the ground. Both of them stumbled forward, free for the first time, their bodies shaking as they collapsed against him. The monster rose again, furious and bleeding, dragging itself forward with inhuman rage. The women clung to the human, whispering broken words of thanks even as tears streamed down their faces. He shoved them behind him, his weapon raised, his eyes locked on the beast. The wreck was dying, the enemies closing in, the air filled with fire and screams. But now, for the first time since he stepped aboard, he wasn't alone. The chamber burned with red light and smoke, the ship's dying systems howling through every corridor. The human held his weapon tight, standing in front of the freed women as the wounded monster dragged itself forward, snarling through sparks and blood. Its claws scraped the floor, gouging deep scars into the metal. He pulled the trigger, but the rifle clicked empty, its last round spent on breaking the chains. The women gasped in terror, clutching his arms, their bodies trembling. He hurled the useless weapon aside and reached for the jagged shard of metal he had driven into the beast before. The monster lunged, and he swung upward with raw desperation, slamming the shard into its eye. The glow burst into darkness as the creature collapsed, thrashing in its death throes before finally going still. The floor vibrated beneath them, not from its fall, but from something deeper, something alive in the heart of the wreck. The women tried to stand, but their legs faltered after so long in chains. He caught them both, dragging them toward the corridor. Alarms screamed, and panels exploded in showers of sparks as he guided them through smoke-choked halls. The wreck shook violently, metal screeching as if the ship itself resisted their escape. Every step was a battle against collapsing bulkheads and rising flames. Then the quieter woman spoke through heavy breaths, her voice trembling. "There's something you must know. We are not only slaves." The human slowed, his eyes narrowing. She glanced at the other, who nodded, though shame shadowed her face. "We carry something, hidden inside us. Codes, stolen from our masters. They used us as living vaults. That is why we were never allowed to die." He stopped in his tracks, the weight of her words pressing against his mind. Stolen war codes. Enough to change battles, maybe entire wars. He realized now why the pirates had returned, why the creatures were programmed to guard them. They weren't just victims, they were keys. The bolder woman's voice broke the silence, sharp and bitter. "We never trusted humans. We were taught you were weak, filthy scavengers. But when I saw you fight, I considered giving you to them in exchange for my life." Her words cut deep, but she lifted her chin unashamed. "I thought survival mattered more than honor." The quieter woman shook her head fiercely. "But I stopped her. I told her humans are different, and now you proved it." Her eyes glistened as she pressed a hand against his chest. "You saved us when you could have fled. You are not like them." The ship groaned violently, tearing itself apart around them. The human's face hardened as he pulled them both closer. "Whatever you've done, whatever codes you carry, it doesn't matter now. You're free, and I'm not leaving you." The corridor ahead lit with new danger. Pirates, bloodied but alive, retreating from the monsters that hunted them. Their leader, scarred and furious, spotted the human with the women and roared in rage. "They're ours! Give them back! Earth rat!" He raised his rifle, but the monsters surged from behind, tearing into his men. Screams filled the hall as blood sprayed across the walls. The leader fought viciously, but the creatures swarmed, their claws tearing through his armor. The women clung tighter to the human, their voices trembling. "We can't escape both them and the beasts. The wreck will collapse before we reach the docking bay." The human looked into their desperate eyes, then back to the chaos. He knew there was no safe path left, but he had one chance, to use the codes they carried, not as weapons for war, but as the key to controlling the dying ship itself. As fire raged and enemies screamed in the dark, he made his choice. The ship shuddered as though tearing itself apart from the inside, metal screeches echoing through every corridor. The human dragged the two women forward, smoke and sparks raining from above. Behind them, pirates screamed as the monsters ripped through their ranks, but even that chaos felt small compared to the growing roar deep within the warship's core. The codes, he realized, were more than stolen data. They were linked to the vessel itself, woven into the machine like veins of fire. The quieter woman clutched her chest, her eyes glowing faintly as her collar pulsed. "It's alive," she whispered, her voice breaking. "This ship, it responds to us. We are bound to it." The bolder one grabbed his arm, her expression grim. "If you want us to live, if you want yourself to live, you must use us to command it. No one else can." He guided them into a chamber that once served as a command deck, now a grave of shattered consoles and broken glass. The air crackled with energy, every panel flickering, every light burning too bright. He pushed them toward the central console, his mind racing. "What do I do?" The quieter woman pressed her hands against the console, her body trembling as symbols bloomed across the screen. Her voice shook. "Give us your strength. Guide us. The ship will listen." The human clenched his jaw, placing his own hand over hers. A violent surge of energy shot through him, searing his nerves, burning images of war into his mind. Explosions, battles, maps of entire star systems, all pouring into him in a flood of light. The ship screamed. Monsters shrieked in agony as their glowing eyes flickered and went dark, collapsing one after another. Pirates stumbled, firing blindly as the ground quaked. The bolder woman cried out as her collar shattered into pieces, the chain marks on her neck glowing faintly like embers. The others' chains followed, snapping apart and clattering to the floor. The human gritted his teeth, fighting to stay conscious as the wreck roared around them. "I can't hold it," he gasped, his body shaking. But the quieter woman leaned close, her voice fierce despite her trembling. "You can, because you are human. You endure." Her words anchored him, and he pressed harder, forcing the ship's power outward in a final surge. The warship ignited. Beams of pure energy lanced through its broken hull, ripping apart the pirate fleet outside. The monsters, still crawling toward the command deck, howled as their bodies crumbled into dust, their stolen flesh and metal disintegrating. The wreck's core flared like a dying star, then released all its fury in one final storm. Silence followed. The human opened his eyes, barely able to breathe, his body slumped against the console. The two women leaned on him, freed at last, their faces glowing with exhaustion and awe. Fires burned across the remains of the ship, but for the first time the screams had stopped. The bolder woman touched his face gently, her eyes wet. "No one has ever fought for us, no one but you." The quieter one pressed her forehead against his shoulder, her whisper fragile. "You are our savior, and now you belong to us." The human looked at them both, battered and scarred but alive. Around them, the wreck of the warship drifted silent in the void, a grave of enemies and a cradle of something new. He had come here searching for salvage, but instead, he had freed two souls who had been chained to despair. And as their eyes met his, filled with gratitude and something deeper, he knew his life would never be the same.